Hi. Welcome back to the Wandering Pilgrims podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Courtney.
And we are starting a new series.
Yes, we are. I'm very excited about it.
What's the new series on?
Providence at play. So God's hand in history. Particularly American history at this point.
There's a lot there.
There is a lot there.
A lot there.
And it's been vilified so much lately that we really wanted to dig into it and see. Was it, Christian based? Like, can we say that fully? Or are these people, do they have a leg to stand on? Or they say it's not a Christian nation, it wasn't based on Christian values. So we want to really take a look at that, because history's an apologetic. We've been talking about that a lot lately. You can't defend the people that came before us, the saints that came before us, if you don't know history or stories.
And one thing that we're not going to do is make out that America is special. It is not.
Nope.
What we're simply saying is that because we believe in a sovereign God, there is nothing that can happen without it being His will. So the fact that this country exists
is His will.
Is His will. Also, the fact that every other country exists is also His will. Ours is particularly significant because it's the first one founded by the citizenry, not a king or a dictator or a ruling class. So,
lots of doctors and lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, why are we doing this series?
Well, American Christians today are unique in the fact that we are earthly citizens of a country that does seem to have been created by biblical Christian principles as its foundation. So we want to look at that. We want to dig into that. And the way that we've gone about researching this is we don't want modern takes on it. We don't want modern opinions. As much as possible, the research that we have done on this has come from firsthand accounts or interviews or as close to the source as possible. Pretty much all of the books that we've utilized have been from the 1800s. So we're trying to get a perspective of what it looked like in their time, what people who would have known them at least, if not them themselves, what they thought, what they were like, actual things, not conjecture from 21st century or late 20th century historians. There's going to be a bias regardless, but it's easier to sift that bias, it seems, when you're closer to the source.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is we're taking a view of American history and the role that Christians played in it with as close to a proper hermeneutical method as we can.
Yeah. I guess you've been rubbing off on me there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been listening to you teaching, so I guess, yeah. Yeah. Because there's always bias. I will freely admit that there is a bias in a majority of the material that I've read. The bias, I'm not going to lie, is Christian. Because from our research, we cannot say that every single one of these founders was Christian. But they did have a reverence for the Bible. The other thing is that with that bias, I don't know if it's because we're so familiar with the faith and Christianity and what the fruits of it look like and what they don't, that at least for me, when I've been reading this stuff, it's easier to go through and go, okay, he's being biased just because they said this, but that doesn't prove.
Yeah.
So that's a little easier to sift than all of the secular possibilities. So I found that. I've also found it interesting to see what a person from like the 1800s, how they write.
Yeah.
And their bias and perspectives. versus what we come up against now.
Yeah.
There's a plethora of all over the place.
Yeah, and with recent events and everything else, the things that have gone on.
Yeah.
How should we conduct ourselves and whatnot? First and foremost, as citizens of God's heavenly kingdom, and also citizens of our country. What they thought about different things. So like taxes or, the reasons why that they wrote the Declaration in the first place.
Yeah.
There's a lot of back and forth about Matthew 22:21.
Yeah.
Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Was it sinful for them to declare independence from the governing authority?
There's been that argument made.
Then of course, Titus 3, 1 Peter 2, Romans 13, about submitting to government authorities. And then we also have several examples from Daniel and other places where they don't submit.
Yes, there's instances where we see that. So yeah, it's interesting to compile all of what we know from Scripture and to look at these things. Especially in light of the things, Essential Church came out and MacArthur's Church, what they did during the mess that happened. So it's relevant, because there were lots of people who were saying for a time, our entire country was built on a sinful act of rebellion. And, most people don't know that the people who were helping lead this were dubbed the Black Robe Regiment because there were so many Presbyterians. And you did a great little short on that, which you can find on our Wandering Through History playlist on YouTube. And I highly, highly recommend checking it out. So maybe we should do a whole episode on the Black Robe Regiment. I mean, that would be pretty fun.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so we just talked about submitting to government authorities.
Yeah.
Like we have precedent for that in Scripture, but then also in Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than man.
Exactly.
So what do we do in a case in which we're supposed to submit to governing authority, but their command to us is to sin?
Exactly.
And I think that's in part that's where this discussion is going to go.
Yeah. And our hope with this series is to especially discuss the documents. But when we were prepping for this and getting ready and trying to figure out where to start, the idea just kind of dawned on us that, well, if we want to understand this document, then we need to understand the people that wrote it.
Yeah.
And what their beliefs were, where they came from, what they're thinking, what their influences are. So what we're going to start with will be the signers of the Declaration. So these are men that were, some of them helped write it. All of them voted.
Yeah.
Almost all of them voted for it.
Yeah.
But they all signed it. So they were all willing to be traitors.
Yeah, and this wasn't something they just did at a whim.
No.
They met multiple times, went through multiple different avenues of addressing the grievances and different things. And all of that is listed in the Declaration of Independence. They cite all these things. And they voted. The representatives of the colonies debated heavily and ultimately voted, with some even abstaining from voting.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me is that everybody's familiar with the Declaration of Independence. Most people aren't familiar with how hard they worked to not have to do it in the first place. Yeah. They tried really, really hard not have to leave the British Empire. And it just got to a point where nothing they said was being heard, and they weren't being represented, and they were being taxed unjustly. They were being assaulted. They were being abused, whether physically or, financially or in, and
not only were they not being protected by the authority over them, they were being abused by them.
Basically. I mean, when you think about quartering, I mean, that's an abuse of power.
Yeah.
And some of the things that the British government did, which we'll get into.
And we're not talking about like the medieval sentence of like quartering.
No.
We mean the
soldiers were allowed to stay within people's homes.
Yeah.
No pay was given to these families. They could eat and do whatever they pleased.
They basically just came into your house and were like,
over.
We're taking over. We're staying here.
Yeah.
We're eating your food. We're drinking your
and
drinks.
You had no say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, think about that as an American today. Could you imagine somebody coming into your home and telling you that you now have no right to your home, you have no right to your food, you have no right to anything that goes on, and you have to serve these people at the same time? So, yeah, that's going to rub people the wrong way in general. So all this stuff leads up to other abuses, which the irony, history repeats itself. So not going to get into it today, but, with some of these things that the government ends up doing and back and forth between the people who are trying to stand up for America, and it definitely was reminiscent when we were reading it and thinking through it that, man, this stuff hasn't changed much.
Yeah. So, one of the things we're going to talk about is how do we put this into practice? How do we honor God by being good Christian citizens in the United States? How do we understand, how do we read the history? How do we, and I'm sorry I don't have a better word for it, but what hermeneutic do you use to look at this stuff? We have a biblical hermeneutic, which is, what does the writer mean by this, right? In the context of the time and place that they were in, that plays a part in it. But what was the writer's original intent in the writing? That we look at history the same way. So when they wrote the documents, when they were writing letters and books and papers and articles and different things, what did they mean by it? Not, well, what does this mean nowadays? What does this mean to me?
Which is a big problem.
Yeah.
Well, I follow a homeschool historian, and I love her stuff, and she's absolutely right. There's a bias regardless. You're never going to get away from a bias. Everybody's slanted. Yeah. The key is recognize it. Yeah. Always recognize it. That's another reason that I like going as close to the source as you can. And at least with them, their bias is easy to recognize, at least to me, because I see what he's doing. He's trying to show all of the Christian influences, and I get that. And I say he because there's one primary author, L. Carroll Judson, which I'm thankful for Nikki Truesdale and the Knowledge Keepers, because it's one of the books that she's republished. And he takes pains to show that there was a Christian influence. Now, granted, probably a little more easy to call someone a Christian than he should be, but that's his slant. And knowing scripture and knowing what it says about fruit and things like that, it makes it a lot easier to research that aspect, to go, okay, he's saying this, let me go look and see what they said and believed. But he's not wrong in that. And then we have several other books and that we're using, and it's been a whirlwind to kind of go through all these things with people so close to these men in time.
One of the other things that we want to look at in this series is we want to have a firm grasp of the rights listed in these documents. That these documents don't give us these rights.
Yes,
they protect them. The documents and the writers of the documents and the documents themselves are written in such a way that they assume correctly that the rights that they list are given by God. They are God-given natural rights, and we can explore where that comes from, where the idea of natural rights comes from as well. But the other thing is to have a correct grasp of those rights, why they're protected, and what those rights actually are.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal. And also, there's Paul to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Paul is a fantastic example of how to be a good citizen.
Yeah. Yes.
But he knew his rights.
Mm-hmm.
He knew the laws. He knew what he was granted by being a Roman citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we miss that a lot in our country.
Mm-hmm.
Even a lot, I mean, let's be honest. We've talked about the fact that most Christians, quote unquote, don't read their Bibles.
Yeah.
So they don't read the thing that they claim to be. Well, a similar thing goes for people who are ultra patriotic, Christian or not. If you don't understand the rights and the history of your country and where it came from, how do you defend that properly?
Yeah, you can't. You can't. And the fact that Paul was a Roman citizen played such a heavy role in what he was able to do.
Yes.
For the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the way, even going all the way to Caesar.
Yeah.
The fact that he knew that he could make that request or make that demand is significant.
Yes, it is. I think it's a huge deal and something that we don't talk about a lot. So, I mean, he was an expert. He was an expert in Roman law, it seems. But we also know he was an expert in Jewish law.
Yeah.
So, he knew his rights.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important. And depending on how everything goes, that may become extremely important for Christians. Yeah. So, you need to know your rights. You need to know your privileges. And we see him utilize those. That's an example. So, we should follow suit, especially since he teaches so much about being a good citizen. You know, there's so much reference to Paul's writings when we get to obeying government authorities. Yeah. So, you know, let's go to the source again,
Yeah,
which is Scripture ultimately.
Because one thing we don't want to be, and that the early church during the time of Acts in the 1st century and 2nd century and 3rd century, all the way up to today, the one thing that we should never be viewed as are rebels, like rebel fighters, things like that. Those examples of respectful defiance are more abundant than even with martyrs from the church. You know, as far as the Reformation and different things like that play out. There are different cases for armed rebellion and things like that throughout history that we'll probably go over, that will play a role as well. But we don't want to bring, as Christians, we don't want to bring any reproach whatsoever upon Christ.
Yes.
That's something that we definitely do not want to do.
So we have to look at this very carefully, and we know everything is ordained by God throughout history. And, you know, you have instances where it would be called rebellion. The founding of our country would be called rebellion. You have instances throughout history where people took up arms. Yeah. Whether that be for their independence, or whether that be for aspects of faith. You have the Waldensians who went to take back their home because they've been expelled. Yeah. We've been doing a series on that, which has been a lot of fun because we got to visit where they came and settled here. And then, you know, you have aspects of faith within the British Civil War with Cromwell and everything. Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many aspects of this that it's not cut and dry. It's not black and white. Anybody who says history is black and white hasn't studied it very deeply. Yeah. because there's very few instances of black and white.
Mm-hmm.
There are some, but
Yeah.
there's way more gray.
A whole lot more gray.
Yeah.
The earth is in its sinful state, and humans in their sinful state, unfortunately, have an abundance of gray.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but we'll be going through this series for quite some time, and we'll interject other episodes as well.
Yeah.
Into this, so this will be an ongoing thing that we're doing for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked about if we just did one episode per week, it would take us more than a year.
Yeah, it would.
To go through it.
To do the research for these, to do them justice.
Yeah, it takes a while.
It takes a while, so we're anticipating we're going to try to put at least some episode out every week. They might not all be on this topic, but they're probably going to be history related.
Mm-hmm.
But we're anticipating right now that these will come out about every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because that gives us enough time to make sure we've got the material handled as best as we can. We're amateurs at this.
Mm-hmm.
We love history, but we're amateur historians. I guess would be the way to put it.
Yes.
So,
As we all should
as
be.
we all should be, just like we should all be theologians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've got a lovely new, what would you call it, a set?
Sure.
It's not really a set.
You worked really hard on it, though.
Well, we both worked hard on it. This is a chart. It's here and up here, even though you can't see it on the camera. It is a history chart. Chronological history chart.
Yep.
That we got from where?
The Ark.
The Ark.
Yeah, it's great.
It's amazing. This thing's like 22 foot long.
I don't know
when
how
it's
long.
together.
I can't remember how long it is.
Yeah.
It's really, really long. I didn't have a wall big enough for it.
Yeah.
By itself,
Mm-hmm.
in a straight line.
But you can certainly you can stand here for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
just
I'm still not.
Just following threads.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that a lot when I was trying to help you.
Yeah, I know.
So,
All right, I guess that's this episode.
well, I mean, what all will we be looking at before we close?
Well,
I think that's probably...
We'll be looking at both the founding fathers,
Okay.
The founding documents of our country, significant historical events that took place, the church's role in these things, how to use history as an apologetic.
Yes, because it is.
Mm-hmm.
And things the founding fathers said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe what other people said about those things or about the founders, or because they, we can't assume that everybody loved them.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of heavy debate about things.
Yeah.
Even amongst them.
Yeah.
There was heavy debate about certain things.
I think we're going to try to do them justice to
as best we can.
discern as best we can.
Yeah.
Because they all get slapped with a label. Now they get slapped with certain labels.
Mm-hmm.
And it's meant in a negative way usually.
Yeah.
Because of the state we're in.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's super easy to be, one, ignorant, and two, judge from a modern perspective.
Yeah.
Judge people who lived 300 years ago.
Yeah, you can't do that.
No. Like
because if they judged you now from their perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to think, like, they're doing these things in their time.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take that into account, just like when you're reading scripture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Paul is saying radical things in his day.
Yeah.
Christians are teaching radical things through the gospel. These are radical things to the Greeks and the Jews.
Yeah.
Which is why they're martyred.
Yeah.
Today it's not that big a deal to see a man street preaching and proclaiming the gospel and doing those things, at least in this country.
Yeah. And yet that's becoming
it is
more
extremely,
dangerous.
it's becoming way more dangerous. now than it was, say, 50 years ago. But it's not uncommon.
No.
It wasn't uncommon to see people street preaching then, but not about the gospel.
No, there were people
Proclaiming Christ crucified. And this radical, to the Greeks, monotheism, this radical idea about serving one God and one God only, and Christ being Lord and not worshiping Caesar, and then to the Jews that Christ is the promised Messiah. These radical things. One thing we will not be doing is making any sort of claim that all of the founders were Christian.
No, we'll take a look at their faith as best as we can, but it's hard to find definitive answers on these things. So, I mean, there are a couple where they've put into their own words what they believe.
Yeah.
So you take them at face value.
At least at the time in which it was written.
So, I mean, you take it at face value. You have their own words explaining what they believe.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, you don't. You have their quotes, and you can tell that they talked about God or they talked about the Bible, and they seem to revere it. But some of these people are much lesser known. And usually when a historian goes in and really looks at them, for the most part, even if they do mention their faith, they don't go into where were they a member, how long were they a member, who was their pastor, what was taught. They don't do that. Yeah. So it's very hard to figure out where all of these people landed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
especially, towards the end of their lives.
Yeah, exactly.
One, like you were saying, one thing that we are going to talk about is how the vast majority of the founders, whether Christian or not, placed enormous value on the scriptures.
They did. They all seem to have believed that the Bible was the epitome of morality for the entire world. And they valued religion as a whole, particularly the Christian religion. So you cannot separate that from America. Just in this research that we've done about the people that have started this country, anybody that says that this country was not founded on Judeo-Christian values is ignorant at best.
Yeah.
But can we claim they're all Christian? No. Did they all absolutely revere it and believe that Christianity was the epitome of religion and that society would be horrible without it? Oh, yeah. They did. There's quotes to this.
Yeah.
That they believed a society without Christianity would be horrible. Well.
Yeah.
Looky here, what do we got? That's what we've been moving towards. That's what we're seeing in our time. So, I mean, these things are, you can't separate it. You can't. And to say that you can is ignorant. I'm trying to find a word.
Well, at best, it's ignorance. At worst, it's nefarious.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're trying to separate two things. The irony is that I can think of at least one founding father who at points tried to separate things. Different kinds of teachings and things, which we'll get into. But it just, you can't separate it. Because you have all these people that tout church and state, separation of church and state, and that gets on my nerves because that's not in the Constitution. It's not in the founding documents. It's not what that means. No, that's not what it means at all. It was in a personal letter that Jefferson wrote, and the courts used it and should not have because it was not in any way relevant to what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that they did not view this country secularly.
Yeah.
They did not expect this country to succeed without Christianity at the helm and center of it.
Yeah. Not as in a theocracy.
No.
But just, it would not succeed without a Christian citizenry.
Exactly.
And
They in no way, shape, or form were trying to form
Yeah.
a theocracy or have a state church like Church of England.
hmm
There you go. That might be a clue as to what separation of church and state might mean.
Yeah.
Maybe. Could you think?
It's almost like they didn't want to be British anymore.
I know.
I
But
mean,
it's kind of like that when all those people came over here so they could practice their religion without anybody saying anything about
Yeah,
practicing religion.
away from England.
Who would have thought?
Odd.
That's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't separate these things.
Mm-mm.
And it does a disservice to the history and to the people.
Yeah.
And it certainly has done a disservice to the people now.
I mean, if you want to imagine how this country could run without a Christian citizenry, just look at it.
Yeah.
Just look at it right now.
Mm-hmm. So we're definitely looking forward to this
Yes, we
series.
are. We are.
So we hope y'all will too.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've added video.
Yes.
So that's something to get used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm having to get used to it because I know that I have a face for radio. So it's unnerving.
Well, hopefully this will be helpful to others. I did want to mention that part of this series that we're going to start is we're going to have extra podcast episodes and it'll be a video thing as well. So it'll cross over between all of our platforms. For patrons and subscribers on our Instagram and on Spotify. What it's going to be is we're going to be reading a lot of these documents that people don't read anymore.
Yeah.
Historical documents. We've done one on the Mayflower Compact already. That's available for our subscribers. And then, of course, you get extra stuff for being a subscriber, of course. Like voting on stuff and knowing about stuff that's coming before anybody else. But I did want to say that we've started doing that. So we hope that it'll be helpful because tracking some of this stuff down, I mean, the more common...
Yeah, it gets difficult sometimes.
I mean, the more common stuff you can find the Mayflower Compact and all, but I don't know, something about hearing these things read it's just different. So, and we'll be reading some of the speeches from these founders and things that they've said, letters and speeches and things. We've talked about doing, since John Adams and Abigail Adams had such a long history of writing to each other, we've talked about doing their letters back and forth.
Yes, we have.
Him reading John's and me reading Abigail's. And I think that would be an interesting way to learn about history from the people that lived it. So we'll be doing those kinds of things. And so if you're already a patron or subscriber, thank you, first of all.
Yes, thank you.
Because it enables us to be able to do this and do this. And
it does.
so we'd like to do this more. But if you value it, consider becoming one. If you'd like to have access to those, maybe for your personal learning or maybe as a homeschool resource, check them out. We're going to start linking to some good history books on these people, at least. So we're really excited about this. I'm really excited about this. So, at least.
So, if you're interested in this series, if you're encouraged that someone is actually doing it, I mean, not that people haven't talked about this stuff before, but hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, hit the don't like button if you want to. That's fine. Share it.
Reviews on the podcasts, the places you listen to the podcast are helpful. 5-star reviews really help drive it. So,
let us know what you think, how we're doing. I think that's it.
Yep.
For now.
Till next time.
All right. Bye.